Upstairs, my parents and Craig found it all so very funny. They cracked up at the dinner table as I recounted my battles with Robbie, still seething as I ate my spaghetti and meatballs. Craig, for his part, had no issues with Robbie, being a cheerful kid and a by-the-book marginally invested piano student. My parents expressed no sympathy for my woes and none for Robbie's either. In general, they weren't the ones to intervene in matters outside of schooling. Expecting early on that my brother and I should handle our own business, they seemed to view our job as mostly to listen and bolster us as needed inside the four walls of our home. And where another parent might have scolded a kid for being sassy with an elder as I had been, they also let that be. My mother had lived with Robbie on and off since she was about 16. Following every arcane rule the woman laid down, and it's possible she was secretly happy to see Robbie's authority challenged. Looking back on it now, I think my parents appreciated my feistiness, and I am glad for it. It was a flame inside of me they wanted to keep lit. Once a year, Robbie held a fancy recital so that her students could perform for a live audience. To this day, I'm not sure how she managed it, but she somehow got access to a practice hall at Roosevelt University in downtown Chicago. Holding her recitals in a grand stone building on Michigan Avenue, right near where the Chicago Symphony Orchestra played. Just thinking about going there made me nervous. Our apartment on Euclid Avenue was about 9 miles south of the Chicago Loop, which, with its glittering skyscrapers and crowded sidewalks, felt otherworldly to me. My family made trips into the heart of the city only a handful of times a year, to visit the Art Institute or see a play, the four of us traveling like astronauts in the capsule of my dad's Buick. My father loved any excuse to drive. He was devoted to his car, a bronze-colored two-door Buick Electra 225, which he referred to with pride as the deuce and a quarter. He kept it buffed and waxed and was religious about maintenance schedule, taking it to Sears for tire rotations and oil changes, the same way my mother carted us kids to the pediatrician for checkups. We loved the deuce and a quarter, too. It had smooth lines and narrow tail lights that made it look cool and futuristic. It was roomy enough and felt like a house. I could practically stand up inside it, running my hands over the cloth-covered ceiling. This was back when wearing a seatbelt was optional. So most of the time, Craig and I were just flopping around the rear, draping our bodies over the front seat when we wanted to talk to our parents. Half the time, I pulled myself up on the headset and just put my chin forward so that my face could be right next to my dad's and we'd have the same exact view. The car provided another form of closeness for my family, a chance to talk and travel at once. In the evenings after dinner, Craig and I would sometimes beg my dad to take us out for an aimless drive. As a treat on summer nights, we'd head to this drive-in theater southwest of our neighborhood to watch Planet of the Apes movies. Parking the Buick at dusk and settling in for the show, my mother handing out the dinner of fried chicken and potato chips she brought from home, Craig and I eating it on our laps in the back seat, careful to wipe our hands on our napkins and not the seat. It would be years before I fully understand what driving the car meant to my father. As a kid, I could only sense it, the liberation he felt behind the wheel, the pleasure he took in having a smooth-running engine and perfectly balanced tires humming beneath him. He'd been in his 30s when a doctor informed him that the odd weakness he started to feel in one leg was just the beginning of a long and probably painful slide toward immobility. The odds were that someday, due to the mysterious unsheathing of neurons in his brain and spinal cord, he'd find himself unable to walk at all. I don't have precise dates, but it seemed that the Buick came into my father's life at roughly the same time that multiple sclerosis did. And though he never said it, the car had to provide some sort of sideways relief. The diagnosis was not something he or my mother dwelled upon. We were decades still from the time when a simple Google search would bring up a head-spinning array of charts, statistics, and medical examiners that either gave or took away hope. I doubt he would have wanted to see them anyway. Although my father was raised in the church, he wouldn't have prayed for God to spare him. He wouldn't have looked for alternative treatments or a guru or some faulty gene to blame. In my family, we have a long-standing habit of blocking out bad news, of trying to forget about it almost the moment it arrives. Nobody knew how long my father had been feeling poorly before he first took himself to the doctor. But my guess is it had already been months, if not years. He didn't like medical appointments. He wasn't interested in complaining. He was the sort of person who accepted what came and just kept moving forward. I do know that on the day of my big piano recital, he was already walking with a slight limp, his left foot unable to catch up to his right. All my memories of my father include some manifestation of his disability, even if none of us were quite willing to call it that yet. What I knew at the time was that my dad moved a bit more slower than other dads. I sometimes saw him pausing before walking up a flight of stairs, as if he needed to think through the maneuver before actually attempting it. When we went shopping at the mall, he'd park himself on a bench, content to watch the bags or sneak a nap, while the rest of the family roamed freely. Riding downtown for the piano recital, I sat in the back seat of the Buick wearing a nice dress and patent leather shoes, my hair in pigtails, experiencing the first cold sweat of my life. I was anxious about performing, even though, back at the home, Robbie's apartment, I had practiced my song practically to death. To Craig, he was in a suit, prepared to play his own song. But the prospect of it wasn't bothering him. He was sound asleep, in fact, knocked cold out in the back seat. His mouth agape. His expression blissful and unworried. This was Craig. I spent a lifetime admiring him for his ease. He was playing by then in a Bibby basketball league that had games every weekend and apparently had already tamed his nerves around performing. My father would often pick a lot of as close to our destination as possible, shelling out more money for parking to minimize how far we'd have to walk on his unsteady legs. That day, we found Roosevelt University with no trouble and made our way up to what seemed like an enormous, echoing hall where the recital would take place. I felt tiny inside it. The room had elegant floor-to-ceiling windows through which you could see the wide lawns of Grand Park, and beyond that, the white-capped swells of Lake Michigan. There were steel gray chairs arranged in orderly rows, slowly filling with nervous kids and expectant parents. And at the front of the raised stage were the first two baby grand pianos I'd ever laid eyes on. Their giant hardwood tops propped open like black bird wings. Robbie was there too, bustling about in the floral print dress like a belle of the ball, albeit a matronly belle, making sure all of her students had arrived with sheet music in hand. She shushed the room to silence when it was time for the show to begin. I don't recall who played in what order that day. I only know that when it was my turn, I got up from my seat and walked with my very best posture to the front of the room, mounting the stairs and finding my seat at one of the gleaming baby grands. The truth is, I already was ready. As much as I found Robbie to be snippy and inflexible, I'd already internalized her devotion to rigor. I knew my song so well I hardly had to think about it. I just had to start moving my hands. And yet there was a problem, one I discovered in the split second it took to lift my little fingers to the keys. I was sitting at a perfect piano. It turned out, with its surface carefully dusted, its internal wires precisely tuned, its 88 keys laid out in a flawless ribbon of black and white. The issue was that I wasn't used to flawless. In fact, I'd never once in my life encountered it. My experience of the piano came entirely from Robbie's squat little music room with its scraggly potted plants and view of our modest backyard. The only instrument I ever played was her less than perfect upright with its honky-tonk patchwork of yellowed keys and its conveniently chipped middle C. To me, that's what a piano was. The same way my neighborhood was my neighborhood. My dad was my dad. My life was my life. It was all I knew. Now suddenly, I was aware of people watching me from their chairs. As I stared hard at the high gloss of the piano keys, finding nothing there but sameness. I had no clue where to place my hands. With a tight throat and chugging heart, I looked out to the audience, trying not to telegraph my panic, searching for the safe harbor of my mother's face. Instead, I spotted a figure rising from the front row and slowly levitating in my direction. It was Robbie. We had brawled plenty by then, to the point where I viewed her a little bit like an enemy. But here in my moment of comeuppance, she arrived at my shoulder almost like an angel. Maybe she understood my shock. Maybe she knew that the disparities of the world had just quietly shown themselves to me for the first time. It's possible she simply needed me to hurry things up. Either way, without a word, Robbie gently laid one finger on middle C, so that I would know where to start. Then, turning back with the smallest smile of encouragement, she left me to play my song. This concludes Chapter 1 of Michelle Obama, Becoming. I know it's not perfect audio reading, however, I am using this opportunity to improve on my reading. Join me next time as I attempt Chapter 2 on Michelle Obama, Becoming.